Hello, and this is today another of my videos on the situation in the Middle East. And this time I want to talk again about Gaza, something that I would call really the sad, realistic, sober truth about the situation in Gaza and Gaza altogether. And it has to be said over and over again in view of the fact that there still is so much hype about what President Trump said, what Israelis are saying or not saying, what Hamas is saying and not saying, but what they do, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and all the rest of them. So let's have some historic facts, first of all, about Gaza. Facts. Now, people not always like to hear the truth. The overall atmosphere of the discussion about the Middle East these days is toxic. It's impossible from an intellectual perspective, but I give these videos to those who want to hear, to those who want to listen, to those who may think that maybe we were wrong, maybe we didn't know enough, maybe we should know more now, maybe things are not as they seem to be to us before. And therefore, I would start by saying that on the 21st of October 1948, during the War of 1948, the War of Independence of Israel, what the Arabs called the Nakba, which was their failure to cause another Holocaust to the Jewish people 3 years after the end of the Second World War, when 5 Arab armies invaded the newly established state of Israel in order to destroy it and lost. So, okay, if they call a loss a Nakba, it's their business. It was a loss in a war. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the collaborator with Adolf Hitler in the Second World War, appeared in Gaza, of all places, not in Jerusalem, and declared the establishment of the All-Palestine government. That was supposed to be the beginning of a new Palestinian state. So who stopped it? Not Israel, the Egyptians. They stopped it. And they took over Gaza without annexing it, using it as a base of terrorism against Israel for 8 years until 1956, the Sinai campaign, when Israel took over Gaza, and was forced to give Gaza back to Egypt, not to any Palestinian authority. That was the Egyptian demand, by combined pressure, by the way, of the US and the Soviet Union. That time, President Eisenhower is the one who put the pressure on Israel. So this was the first so-called Israeli occupation of Gaza. And the second chance that the Arabs, in that case Egypt, had to give the Gazans, the Palestinians, independence, home rule, self-rule, whatever you would call it. They did not. Then came the War of 67, the war of aggression against Israel, initiated by Egypt. Israel took Gaza again, okay, for the second time. And then it controlled Gaza until 1994, after the Oslo Accords, which started by Gaza and Jericho first. Yasser Arafat came to Gaza to establish Palestinian authority there. He was confronting opposition from Hamas. You know what happened? They executed so many Hamas people, and for a while they were in control there. In 1967, by the way, importantly enough, when Israel occupied Gaza for the second time, the population of Gaza was 350,000 people. Today, 60 years less later, the population of Gaza is over 2 million. So much for ethnic cleansing, genocide, and all this nonsense. Propaganda, propaganda, propaganda. I will say it again, propaganda. People want to know the truth? Look at the numbers. The numbers say it all. So, after 1994, Gaza basically was in some kind of a dual control, large parts of it under the Palestinians, other parts under Israel. There still were Israeli settlements inside the Gaza area. But then came the Israeli policy of disengagement from Gaza in 2005, to remove all the Jews from Gaza, to hand it over completely, without even 1 centimeter of land owned by Israel anymore, occupied by Israel, give it to the Palestinians. It was the fourth time already, fourth, in which the Palestinians had the authority over Gaza, or at least an Arab authority in Gaza, and they could do whatever they wanted. And we know what happened. It took a while. Hamas took it over. Whether elections or not doesn't matter. Hamas took it over. And Hamas continued to declare war on Israel, holy war. So what did people expect Israel to do? To open the border to Gaza, to allow free movement from Gaza, to allow everything that would be shipped to Gaza, to allow Hamas to do whatever they wanted so that their war of destruction against Israel, as they said it, would be easier. Of course, the Israelis did not do that, and there was a partial siege of Gaza that proved to be a total failure. How do we know? Because as of 2009, when Hamas initiated the attacks on Israel, they used a lot of arms. Where were the Israelis at that time? They failed. They failed. One of the biggest failures was when everybody said to the Israelis, let the Gazans rebuild Gaza. It's a poor area. So in order to build, what do you need? Cement. So the Israelis allowed unlimited shipments of cement to go to Gaza. And you know what they did with it? The tunnels. They did not build shelters to their people. Musa Abu Marzouk, the deputy head of the political bureau of Hamas, during the current situation, declared in his own voice, in Arabic, we took care only of the tunnels to build for our warriors. The civilian population had to be taken care of by UNRWA, by the UN. That's what he said. UNRWA, the so-called Agency for Welfare to Support the Palestinian Refugees, is a terror organization. I will say it again. It is a terror organization that should not exist. People are not refugees after 80 years. And if they are, what about the Jewish refugees from Arab countries? Larger number of Jews were deported from Arab countries after 1948 than the claim about Arabs that were deported from Israel. What about 80 years after the partition between India and Pakistan, refugees there? What about 80 years after the exchange of population between Greece and Turkey after the First World War? So, my friends and viewers, it's nonsense. UNRWA should not exist. There are no refugee camps in Gaza. There might be slums in Gaza, but they are not refugee camps. They are the dwellings of people that their leaders decided not to help their housing conditions, not to improve their way of life in order to invest in arms to the war against Israel. And UNRWA should not exist, period. Its very existence, with schools that teach to hate the Jews, with hospitals that provided a base for Hamas terrorists. Look at the pictures, for God's sake. In one of the exchanges now of hostages, you see a procession of armed Hamas people going out from where? From one of the hospitals. Now look at the pictures of the hostages. The only starvation that existed in Gaza in the last 18 months was the starvation of the Israeli hostages. Alice Nedruti, remember the name, Alice Nedruti. She was the UN official in charge of dealing with issues of starvation, of famine. She made a mistake. She just said the truth. There is no famine in Gaza. What happened to her? She was fired. There was a commission appointed by the UN itself to check the situation of famine in Gaza, and they found out there is no famine in Gaza. The only famine, starvation, was of the Israeli hostages. Hamas is not a Nazi organization. They are a Nazi-like organization. And Nazi-like organizations cannot be partners for peace. Hamas, for the sake of peace, Hamas should be totally destroyed. Totally destroyed, militarily and politically. And it can be done. It should have been done already. It's another story, which is for another, perhaps, video by me, by others, as to why the Netanyahu government conducted the war in Gaza the way they have. But we are now talking about the situation in February of 2025. And there is this Donald Trump, this American president, idea about taking over Gaza, removing all the population from there, rebuilding it to the Riviera of the Middle East. And Israel would hand it over to the US. Well, we honor every president of the United States of America, whether we like him or her. There hasn't been a woman yet. The greatest democracy on earth. There was a woman prime minister in Israel over 50 years ago. There were women prime ministers in Muslim countries, but not in America. That's another story. This plan of President Trump, let's be honest about that, it's nonsensical. Nonsensical. Impossible to implement. Because at the same time that he talks about removing all the Palestinians, he also says to the Israelis, but no more wars. No more wars. Let's finish the deal with Hamas that can last for many more months. We still have 76 hostages at the time when I talk to you. It can go on and on and on and on. And everybody knows you don't just resume a war like that afterwards. So this plan really is full of so many internal contradictions. It's impossible. Of course, to destroy Hamas means alternatives. One of the alternatives is for both Egypt and Jordan to participate in a constructive solution to the problems of Gaza. The two countries that are most of all responsible for the Palestinian situation, because Jordan is having a Palestinian situation of about 70% of its population, and Jordan annexed illegally in 1950 the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria, which is now under Palestinian Authority. And Egypt is having border with Gaza. They have to contribute by absorbing numbers of people from Gaza. Other countries should do it all peacefully. It will take time. But it all can happen if few conditions are met. First of all, that Hamas is totally destroyed. Totally destroyed. Those who are enemies of peace should be destroyed. And I say Hamas, not the Palestinians, not the Palestinian population. There should be encouragement of emigration from Gaza towards Egypt and Jordan that will have to be compensated handily. To other countries in the West, wherever. Yes, the Saudis and the Gulf states will have to cooperate. There will have to be throughout the process an international force of reliable countries monitoring the situation in Gaza and preventing a repetition of what happened in South Lebanon, where the so-called UN peacekeeping force UNIFIL was basically complicit, if not actual collaborator with the Hezbollah against Israel. And the Israeli government will have to accept that Gaza will be ruled by a Palestinian authority of one kind or another, not Hamas. And there will not be Jewish settlements there again. And there will have to be a border between Gaza and Israel. And Gaza will be part of the overall Palestinian settlement. Nobody can expect that everybody will make concessions. The only ones not to will be the Israelis, because Benjamin Netanyahu has coalition partners. Now, we are talking the truth now. The truth is that Gaza does require big solutions, but they have to be realistic, not half-baked cakes out of the oven to serve political interest of one kind or another, even if it is those of the leader of the free world, the leader of the world, maybe, Donald J. Trump, the president of the US. Jordan and Egypt will have to accept concessions. The threats by both Egypt and Jordan to terminate their peace treaties with Israel are very worrisome. Politically, they help militant right-wing, radical right-wing elements in Israel, and for good reason. If these countries are in peace with Israel and they threaten all the time to abolish this peace or to do away with it, why bother to make more peace? So President Trump, please, when you meet King Abdullah of Jordan and President Sisi of Egypt, talk to them first of all about the fact that peace cannot be abolished and will not be tolerated to do it. Give them offer that they can't refuse because they will be generous enough for them to make them appear. On the one hand, we take care of the Palestinians, but on the other hand, this is how we take care of the Palestinians. We help in a solution of the problem, in a humanitarian way. And tell also Mr. Netanyahu that while you help Israel so much, as you should do, by removing all the barriers on supply of arms to Israel and everything else that you're doing about international organizations which have become hotbed of anti-Semitism and racism against Jews in Israel, you also expect Israel to contribute politically to a reasonable and realistic solution. Which means that Gaza will have to be ruled by Palestinians, but Palestinians that are not committed in their covenant to destroy Israel. And do something else, President Trump. Talk to the Qataris. Qatar is playing a double and dangerous, very dangerous game. And Qatar is a very negative element altogether. And you, the US, have 11,000 troops in Qatar. They need you much more than you need them. And it can't be that everything that you say about every other country in the world is, we shall tell them what to do, but when it comes to Qatar, and to a smaller extent to Saudi Arabia, it is like a different language. So when we look at all this situation, we see how complicated it is. Therefore, two advices from me when I end up this discussion. First of all, to everybody, whether you pro this or pro that or anti this or anti that, if you really are interested, if in any realistic solution to the question of Gaza, do not believe that there is something to be done now and everything will be okay. No, it's much more complicated than that. And the other one is, decide once and for all, when you go to talk or to do peace, with whom can you do it? You can do it only with one who really want to do it. And therefore, Hamas has to be destroyed completely. And other Palestinians, as I described before, Herrera suggested, should take over as part of a general deal that will take time, requires patience, requires resilience, but also a lot of resources. Thank you, my viewers.